You're listening to Food Rebels, and welcome. This is the podcast that brings you brands, chefs, and live on-air tastings. A show that's dedicated to the more rebellious side of the food world, where we celebrate the people who have challenged the status quo. We'll be giving you a peek behind the curtains and inside the minds of the people who are shaking up our food industry. You know me, I'm the show host, AJ Sharp, taste expert, food writer, great taste food judge, and of course, business owner. I love meeting new people and tasting new foods. So, sit back as we hear more stories from people in food who dare to be different. Welcome this week to a very special guest. We've got Heston Blumenthal on the show. Welcome, Heston.
Thank you.
Oh, it's so great to have you on the show. You have long been one of my absolute culinary heroes ever since, I think it was about 15 years ago or so, I ate at dinner at the Mandarin Oriental and I got to try your meat fruit, which at the time was in all the press. It was everywhere and it was the most, I just remember being so excited to be there to try it.
Yeah, I think it ended up being the most photographed food dish on the web.
I believe it.
On the social media. Yeah,
it just blew your mind, though. It was this beautiful, it was an apple, wasn't it? And it blew your mind because you thought you were going to taste something sweet, and then it was this beautiful, savoury. I remember it so well.
We did an apple. We did the Mandarin probably was the biggest one that we've done, and a plum one, and that came from a Channel 4 show years ago. It was Heston's Feasts. So we found an old recipe from about 1500, and it was called Pommes Dorées, and you mince up meat, form it into a ball, put it on a spit, turn it, and then baste it with the parsley custard so it looked like an apple. And Channel 4, when we served the guests this, it was a bowl of fruit, but it was all edible. We did grapes as well. And I think what Channel 4 wanted was Eric, my maitre d' at the time, said, I think it was Greta Scacchi who was being served, would Madame like one of my big fat plums? Because it was all about the double entendre of plums and balls plums, testicles.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, you have been on the TV, on the radio, you've done so many different things about this incredible concept of, is it called molecular gastronomy?
Well, funny enough, I used to rebel against that name. And then I realised, literally the last year, I didn't know what the dictionary description of gastronomy was. So I looked it up, and it is the sourcing, S-O-U-R-C, sourcing, preparing or cooking and eating good food. I always thought that gastronomy was, reserved for Michelin stars and stuff like that, but no. So I ended up being so obsessed about zooming in to the minutiae of food, almost the things that we can't see. So we can't see what we smell. We can't see what we smell. I mean, yes, if you've got a broth boiling on the hob, you're going to smell what comes out of it. But you can see the broth. You can't see the smell. So molecular gastronomy is the same as gastronomy. It's just looking at small things. But I also zoom out and look at big things. So I got fascinated by that. One of the, I suppose, actually what I should do is take you back to when I was 15 or 16. Now, I grew up in Britain. I was born in 66. And in those days, there was only one type of pasta you could buy in the supermarket. It was spaghetti in a blue packet. I can't even remember the name. And olive oil, you had to go to the pharmacy because you poured it into your ears when they were blocked. You didn't cook with olive oil.
Yeah.
So that's how far British food had come at that time. Had never an oyster, I knew what an oyster looked like, or a lobster, or a Michelin star. Had no idea. My mum was a good cook. My food memories, probably my earliest one, was being taken to Church Street Market in London with my grandmother and my sister. I might have been, 6 or 7 years old. And we were dragged around this old bric-a-brac market, the last thing you wanted to do on a Saturday morning. However, she loved it because she'd had banter with all the traders, her and her best friend. But we passed an ice cream parlour on the way home, a Sicilian one. They didn't have that many choices, but I got a tub of ice cream. It was vanilla ice cream, a brown paper bag, and then I wasn't allowed to eat it until we got home. And the walk was less than 10 minutes, but it seemed like a week. Later on, fast forwarding to sort of maybe after I was 15 years old and really fell down the rabbit hole of cooking, ice cream was the first area that I looked at the science of. So this lack of gastronomy, this lack of knowledge of fine food and fine restaurants and fine dishes meant that we used to go to Cornwall every year on our holiday. One year my dad did well, his business, so we went to France. And he'd read about this 3 Michelin star restaurant called the L'Hosto de Beaumanière. And I was 16, and I had the same first time experience as my parents did. And the tables were set out in this beautiful garden. There were olive trees and lavender all over the place. Fountain in the background. There was an old medieval village lit up at night. The noise of the feet of the waiting staff crunching on the gravel, I remember that. And there were crickets in the background. The smell of lavender was intoxicating. They were pouring sauces into soufflés and carving legs of lamb at the table. The wine list is like a billboard. So I'd fallen down a gastronomic rabbit hole.
Excellent. And all of that becomes part of it, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing what the memory can do when it comes to food. And also, when I opened the Duck in 1995, there was only one door. There still is one door in, one door out. There's a back door, but you can't access it. So everything has to come in and out that front door. The restaurant was so small, I didn't have my memory of the Beaumanière, with also bauxite cliffs and with this medieval town on top. Magical place. I didn't have that. I had it's a lovely old building, but I had 4 walls in a very small building. And I think what I confused said I wanted to be a chef. I think I wanted to recreate that memory I had in the restaurant when I was 15 or 16. And through questioning everything, being like a really annoying child saying why, that process led me to, I realised that what I wanted to trigger was all my senses: smell, sight, touch, taste, sound, which led to the whole, it came up with this notion of multi-sensory cooking and eating. And I think in those days, even the neuroscience world, they were looking at what you call a cross-modal, so how the sense of sight affects the sense of smell, etc., etc. But you can't separate them. It's our whole being when we eat. After this experience, I started buying cookbooks. And I bought them, the great chefs of France, but they were in French and I didn't speak French.
Excellent.
So there's 1 or 2 I translated with a pencil and paper, with an English to French dictionary, word for word.
Wow.
Talk about life's too short to stuff a mushroom.
That's a labour of love.
That's a labour of love, definitely.
And I suspect a lot of the words and a lot of the culinary techniques that they were talking about in a French cookbook at that time weren't necessarily known in the UK. I don't know, were they? Not
really, no. And in those books, because of my ice cream fetish, fascination, attachment from my childhood, most of the chef's books have recipes in for vanilla ice cream. And I was looking at these recipes. They didn't have all the same ingredients as the other recipes. They didn't have the same measurements. So I was thinking, why are they different? Is it because that's just what they've learnt, or is it because there's a reason for the ingredients to go in there? And I came across a book called Ices by Robin Weir that started to explain what the role of the ingredients were. So that was my first part of scientific research. At the same time, I bought a book in 1984 by somebody called Harold McGee, and it's called On Food and Cooking, The Science and Law of the Kitchen. And it's not... So food science, you go to university to get a degree in it. This is the science of cooking. But why do eggs make our soufflés rise? And questions like that.
Yep.
In there, he said, browning meat doesn't keep in the juices. I thought, what?
Hang on.
This has gone against... Yeah, hang on a second.
Everything we've ever been taught.
Absolutely. And that's when I developed, which is my... Actually, you can see it on him, my coat of arms. The motto underneath, right there, is question everything.
Amazing.
And that's what I did. Annoying kid, why? And I learnt so much from that. Yeah, the list is endless, actually.
Oh, no, it's amazing. And I can see all these moments in your childhood and your formative years. I can really see how it's brought you to here. What fascinates me is the way your brain works, that what's different, it seems to me, not being a scientist or a doctor or anything, is that you're not filtering out all the other information. You're actually consciously tuning into all of the information and absorbing all of it at the same time, and then playing with all of those different elements, which is really fascinating, because most of us go through life in a kind of blur of, you're looking at your, well, not back then looking at your phone, but you're absorbed by the conversation, or you're absorbed by whatever it is you're doing. You're not really taking in this entire bigger scope all at the same time, whereas you really obviously were.
Exactly. I didn't realise just how much depth I was looking into things. So bear in mind, I left school with 6 O-levels and 1 A-level in art. However, cooking, I realised, cooking and eating it's optional at GCSE, and they've removed it at A-level. But it's the only subject that every other subject comes under. If you imagine physics, you're doing physics, biology, clearly, you're making food, chemistry, the result of the physical actions and stuff, geography, geology, language, maths, the list goes on. Everything comes under cooking and eating. So it is a massive, massive subject. But I got so obsessed, I think this might be down to one, I don't know if it is my ADHD or not, but one characteristic of ADHD is when you find something you love, you just bed into it and you don't stop.
You hyper-focus.
And that resulted, I didn't realise the impact that I had, or the duck was having, on world gastronomy. I was stuck in this little kitchen, and food in Britain, when I was growing up, as I said, in the 60s, it was worse. It was terrible. It was so much worse. And I remember, a few years ago now, Jack Chirac at a G Summit meeting in Scotland, Gleneagles, said Britain has the worst food in Europe, second only to Finland. Now, no offence to Finnish listeners, but that was outrageous. So it gave me a lot of motivation as well. It's quite funny.
Yeah, I imagine. Nothing like being completely misunderstood and got wrong to fire up the burners of change.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was in 1995 that you set up the Fat Duck, so 30 years ago this year.
Yes.
And what was the intention with the Fat Duck?
Well, because going back to my memory in France, I wanted to cook. Mm-hmm. I had various other jobs. I was a photocopy salesman.
You were a photocopy salesman?
Yeah, but there's a lot of things you didn't know about me. Horrible.
The great Heston Blumenthal. I mean, it's just
it was horrible. Absolutely. I was knocking on office doors just to see the last thing a person wanted to see when they work in their office is a cold calling photocopying salesman.
I do agree.
But all along I wanted to cook, and so when I opened the Duck, my ambition, it wasn't ambition. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to get a Michelin star one day? I had no idea that from opening the Duck, those following 10 years, the amount of imagination and creativity that came pouring out with my cooking led to 3 Michelin stars. It was quite an amazing thing, really.
And incredible, because that obviously wasn't your goal. You weren't setting out to get Michelin stars. You were setting out to create an experience.
Yes, I was.
So were you starting... You were starting with this feeling, so this was taking you back to this moment that you had as a young man. When you're starting with that feeling that you're trying to create in somebody, do you actually feel it viscerally in your body? You're like, this is exactly how I want to make this person feel. Now, how do I build the parts to make that happen?
Sometimes, yes. I never thought that some of the dishes, the Duck, some of my dishes, would bring people literally to tears. So we've got a dish called Sound of the Sea, which looks like the sand, sea vegetables, and some fish, and the waves lapping up against the shore. Then we serve it with the little iPod stuffed into a seashell. So you listen to the sound of the sea while you eat the dish. Wow. And this dish and a couple of others, yes, the dish was delicious, but it wasn't that the dish was so fantastic that they started crying. The combination of the soundtrack and the dish, the taste of the sea, has brought a lot of people back to childhood in a really wonderful way. So, yeah, being able to create I've been asked before about what was it I was trying to achieve, and I realised that the Fat Duck is in fact in the business of emotion and feeling. We happen to use food and cooking, to generate those emotions. It could be excitement, curiosity, adventurous, it could be nostalgic, it could be many, many things.
It's incredible. It's almost like a therapy of joy, I imagine, although it depends what feelings come up for you at that moment.
Yeah, I had a moment last year, I think it was, when I was sitting, because I do lots of tastings, quite a lot of them there, just for consistency and, working on new ideas and stuff. But I had tears in my eyes at one dish, and I never thought I'd cry in my own restaurant. It was also the fact that I was the team. I couldn't fault anything that the team were doing. It was a wonderful moment I never imagined would happen.
It was exactly what you wanted to have achieved in that exact moment.
Yes.
I mean, they talk a lot about it, don't they? I did a tasting course with the redefined food.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was about the bias that we put onto things, because we look at certain foods, don't we? And we see red, and if you come from a certain culture, you think, oh, it's probably going to be a sweet, fruity kind of flavour. All these different flavours and all these different colours. And it was like, what flavours do you associate with different colours? And it's fascinating that it's not just, it's a cultural perception, it's what you're used to, it's what you have ever experienced before that will tell you what you're going to experience. Do you notice that? Do you notice different people from different nationalities experience your food in different ways?
They do. Different people do as well. For example, sight is obviously imagination, which is technically it's not a sense. But sight is the first sort of port of call from the senses. And it's like the senses are bodyguards, protectors of the mouth, because it's a very intimate thing to do. When you eat food and swallow food, you're putting things inside your body. I mean, you need them, but still you're doing that. So even when you don't realise it, your eyes, the sound around you, the smells you can smell, make a massive difference. And I've played around with that quite a lot before. The first time was probably in 2000, 2004. Orange and beetroot jelly. So you get 2 cubes of jelly. One is orange and the other one is beetroot. However, for the orange one that looks like orange, and for the orange one, we use golden beetroots because they're orange coloured. And for the beetroot one, we use blood orange. So you take a spoon of what you think, we say start with the orange, because the orange can be a colour and a flavour. So you start with the orange, and it's in fact beetroot. But it's only when you go to the orange one that looks like beetroot, you realise it's been flipped. And the same thing, tomatoes, green tomatoes don't taste as ripe as red ones, and even though they can have a stronger taste. I think Heinz brought out a green ketchup several years ago now, and it didn't do that well
because it wasn't what people were expecting.
And in fact, my first, the thing where I came up with the dish. This is what I'll come on to the a la carte, the 30-year anniversary in a second, but one of the dishes that's going to be on that menu was the dish that led me to the title multi-sensory. And it was crab risotto with crab ice cream. Now, in those days, crab ice cream was like, what are you doing? Now people don't bat an eyelid, really. But I found that if I called it a crab ice cream, I got a different response to calling it a frozen crab bisque. So this led to my first paper. It was with Sussex University, and we did it with smoked salmon. So frozen smoked salmon parfait or smoked salmon ice cream, it was the same. And people found when you called it ice cream, it was saltier, 10 to 20% saltier than when you called it smoked salmon parfait. It's because when you say ice cream, you expect sweet. So when you expect sweet but you get salt, is a much bigger difference than if you expect salt and get salt.
Yeah.
And that got me off and running on all sorts of sensorial experiments, playing crunching sounds, playful.
Very much so. You mentioned ADHD earlier. I through my son being diagnosed, discovered I have ADHD, and I've been diagnosed. And I've always had a real thing about my perfect dish doing everything. You know, I kind of want it to be chewy and I want it to be soft, but I also want it to crunch and I also want it. And I think it's this like almost like I need to scratch an itch in my brain and feel all of those different sensations.
A bit like, when you're hungry for something and you open all the cupboard doors and the fridges and you can't find what you're hungry for. I think that's also getting something perfect. I had a whole thing about this in the definition of the word perfection. And in fact, it was, what's his name? Ex-French pilot Saint-Exupéry, who said perfection is when you can't take anything else away, or you're not aware of needing to remove anything else. But in search of it, you can eat an awful lot of food.
Yeah, to find that perfect moment.
Yes, yeah.
So what have you done differently? I read something, if you've got a big menu now coming out to celebrate your 30 years at the Fat Duck.
Yes, so we've got, we're in the process of reopening the Duck now, so in the next couple of days we're going to have the existing Journey tasting menu, but we've been working tirelessly to put on this an a la carte. So it'll bring back dishes maybe from 20 years ago.
Oh wow, fun.
Even 30 years ago, but we've got much more technique and wiseness and expertise than we had then. And the menu will be, it'll be a choice of 3 or 4 courses instead of the big tasting menu. And what we've done is, because it's a much shorter menu, there's less stuff, less dishes in there, we've dropped the prices down. It's £200, but what I want to do is try and make everything accessible. There's so many people that want to go to the Fat Duck, but
absolutely, I'm one of them. It's on the list.
Like, well, and so we're going to do a Hall of Fame. So a bit like I mentioned the crab ice cream, and there's a couple of dozen other dishes that they're being brought back to celebrate the last 30 years, and some of them won't go back on the menu again. They'll go into a wall. We want to put a wall of fame into the Duck, so you can have the photos of these dishes that a bit like, I think I remember seeing Monsters Inc. or something, and the older bear says to the younger one, there's a photo of Granddad Bear, and he said, if he hadn't rode over from wherever it was, you wouldn't be here today. So these dishes are the ones that really formed the Fat Duck, so people will get to try them.
That's incredible. And people have copied them, haven't they? They've become absolutely iconic in British cuisine.
Yeah.
What you did really changed the way people looked at food. Not just to look at food as a science. And I do think it's literally your teachings when I'm teaching my kids and I'm going, no, you need to cut all the potatoes up the same size. Otherwise you're going to get some that are overcooked and some that are undercooked.
Yeah.
And this was a concept I remember you explaining really early on, and you were explaining it to somebody of like, but food is a science. And they were going, no, it's not. And you were like, well, no, it really is. Like, you're changing the format of all these different things from one form to a different form.
You absolutely are. And it comes back to when I was talking about school with physics and biology and chemistry. But what I did, when I had that moment in the Bermanier, the restaurant in France, when I was 16, probably within a year of that, or less, I started reading Harold McGee's book on the science of cooking. So I learnt cooking and science, or the science of cooking, at the same time, which is quite interesting. I only realised that a couple of weeks ago, actually.
And when you apply it to cooking, it's probably one of those things where actually the science, when you were being taught it in a classroom, was not that interesting with the particular teacher teaching something that was so unrelated to real life. Add in food and make it real, and suddenly everyone's really engaged, and it's a completely different subject, but it's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you can do it through triple cooked chips, for example. It's all about the water in the chip and how you get enough of the water out so the chip goes crisp, but not too much out, so because you want a fluffy centre. So there's loads of science in there, and if you get an excuse to get a bowl of liquid nitrogen out as well, then learning becomes even more fun.
I can imagine that. I mean, is there any particular dishes throughout your whole career that you feel really excited to bring back into this menu, or just really excited that you created?
The crab risotto, because it was the creator of multisensory. the multisensory approach to food. It's funny actually, I wouldn't have put snail porridge near the top of my list a few years ago because I thought it was
porridge.
Yes, but in fact now I realise it's that was a groundbreaking dish as well. So that one, the orange and beetroot jelly will come back.
Mm-hmm.
We were the first restaurant. I was the first person to use popping candy.
I remember this
in food. So we're bringing the dish that brought popping candy into the world. That's coming back as well. So there's some roe crackers, and then we'll change the menu every 3 months. It's exciting. It's been a little bit of a challenge for the team, because if you've got the tasting menu, then you've got this a la carte, and I'm hoping as many people can try it as possible.
So is the a la carte? It's different then. So it's not that everyone that comes has the tasting menu.
No, so you can choose the a la carte or the tasting menu, and and so there's not really a crossover of
so the a la carte's the one that's 200, is it?
200, yes.
200. It's accessible for a really special, experience.
Yes, it's expensive. It's not the price of a pub, but it's
a save up for a special occasion menu, isn't it? Exactly.
So we've got the Fat Duck, the Hind's Head, which is next door, which is the pub with the Michelin star.
Yeah,
that's in Bray. Then we have one in London in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel.
Yeah.
Which is all based on historical recipes.
Is it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
We have one in Dubai.
Fantastic.
Yeah. The duck is the main one. I think that they're all really, they're unique. They're different. Although some of the base techniques are similar. One's got 1 star, one's got 2 star, one's got 3 stars. So they're all different.
I'm fascinated by this line. You say, I'm fascinated by the microbiome and the food's potential roles in safeguarding our wellness and mental health. And when I read that, my brain went down a whole rabbit hole of, imagine if different dishes could elicit a specific response in different people, that you could literally have a sort of a therapy menu of like, do you want to be happier? Do you want to lean into a sad feeling? Do you want to feel exultant? Popping candy and...
Do you know, I thought about this, and that would be an amazing thing to be able to do. Very, very complicated, but amazing. A bit like, have you seen the BFG, the Big Friendly Giant, Roald Dahl's?
Oh, with his dreams.
Yeah, so you have these little pots of emotion would be fantastic. I got about 10 years ago, I started getting interested in the microbiome.
Microbiome being kind of gut health and...
Yes, we started off from a single cell bacteria. So we started off from a single cell, split into 2, then that kept on splitting and splitting. But our origins really from our gut in the sea, from the bottom of the sea. And this is obviously going back millions of years. So inside us, there are over 3 trillion bacteria. So there's more bacteria, little creatures inside our bodies and on our skin than planets and stars in the known universe, and we're still discovering more. And you think about something being like the universe is infinite. Okay, that's difficult for some people to get their heads around, but if you think it's infinitely bigger, but it's also infinitely smaller, and that's something that's even harder to get your head. How can something keep on getting smaller? It's smaller because then we can't see it, and then you get to all the dark stuff between the stars. So these microbes, we're walking around. We're a whole solar system full of stuff, and these microbes, they feed off the food that we eat, and our body mainly is water and this bacteria. And it's incredible. But there's a lot of connection now, which I really want to explore, between mental health and gut health. So eating foods that are good for your gut will in turn help, say, conditions or symptoms of neurodiverse people. And also I've got bipolar. So there's some research coming out now on the effect of bipolar as well. So I think that's a fascinating area.
Me too. I mean, you are what you eat, and I mean, we've had a lot of different guests here on the show who have different fermented drinks, from kombucha to kimchi and all sorts of different things in between. And every single one of them talks about this connection of keeping your gut healthy and keeping all the right bacteria in there and how it links to your brain. And one of them made a really interesting point that in the body, if it looks similar, you know, the pink tissue of the brain, the pink tissue of the gut, if it looks similar, it probably does something similar. And he was talking about how your gut feel actually comes from your brain. Of course, it comes from the subconscious knowing of all these bits of information, especially if you have ADHD, taking in a lot of different information. And then how people with ADHD are really able to short circuit very quickly to an answer based on this gut feel that we talk about. And it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And there's more connection or connection pathways from the gut to the brain than there are the brain to the gut.
Really?
So, yes, what you eat affects your mental state, definitely. But also, what's not been heavily explored yet, but will be, your mental state affects your bacteria.
Does it?
So, yeah, you can eat food being in a certain mood, and it will taste different to if you're in another mood. It's a more complex thing. It's a bit like you trying to find your food with smell and what it tastes like, what the texture is, what the smell is like.
Is that because you prepare yourself, don't you? As you're about to eat something, you've looked at it and you're starting to prep your body for what it's going to be.
Yes.
Wow, my brain's just firing off.
And you're when you feel full, so it's where most of the hormones, most like 97-98% of our hormones are in our gut. So it's where all our emotions are, basically.
It's where all the control's coming from.
Yeah, yes.
It's true. I mean, in life when you're making decisions, or particularly when it comes to dishes, are you being guided then by this knowing, this intuition, this kind of gut feeling, more than a logical thought process?
Definitely. There are times where when I've, let's say, done this, because some of the dishes take several years to develop. When I call it's like in that initial blink reaction. If I taste something, when I start grinning, big smile, then that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, after that, I might come up with some problems that would need to be solved around it, but that first response to food, I think, is really important.
I couldn't agree more. I think, one of the things I do when I'm doing great taste judging, you might taste 50 or 60 different products in a day, and some people go, oh, that sounds, awful. And other people say, gosh, that sounds like my absolute perfect job. And I think there's a connection there between the ADHD brain that's dopamine seeking. So you're seeking this wonderful flavour that's going to really excite you, that's going to make you sparkle.
Yes.
And then there's this sort of negative positive reward factor that some of the stuff you taste isn't that great. Some of it's in between, and you're immediately going, oh, how would we improve it? What would I add to this? And it's, and you've got to do this quickly. There's another thing coming. Hot food has to be prioritised over other things, and it's this kind of feedback loop. It works so well with the ADHD brain. I
think that I see it as, imagine you've got human being, and the human doing when it's cooking is sort of 250 grams of something, 100 grams of something else, put it in the oven for 25 minutes and cook until blah blah blah. That's the physical doing. But the being is your relationship with what you're doing, relationship with the recipe, and it's the multi-sensory thing isn't just in the eating. It's really important in the cooking. There's always something. This might be quite ADHD actually. There's always something where, at what point do you let a recipe go or finish because you think it's there? Or do you just keep on wanting to add add something else and then another thing?
Yeah, keep iterating it.
Yes, yep.
Well, there is a perfectionism that goes alongside ADHD, doesn't there?
Yeah, totally.
Of just wanting, like you say, you keep going until you're like, which version do we go back to? We went too far.
Yeah, completely.
Do you notice in that moment that you're saying that if you're in a different mood mentally when you taste a dish, it could actually taste different to you? Do you notice that there's a difference if you have different people in the kitchen I mean, I don't just mean their skill set, and of course everyone has a slightly different skill set, but I mean, if the atmosphere in the kitchen when people are cooking is really jovial, does the food taste different to if it's a grumpy day for some reason?
Definitely.
Really?
Yeah, so stress levels and salt, your levels of stress have an impact on your ability to perceive the taste of salt. So you might over-salt the food.
Wow.
For others. I mean, if you're salting it for yourself, it's a different thing.
Yep.
But yeah, that can definitely have an effect.
You over salt if you're stressed.
If
you
you're
just
stressed,
can't taste salt as well.
You can't. Yeah, you just put more salt on, so it then can be much salty for other people that are less stressed than yourself. So it does. The atmosphere in kitchens has a major effect.
Yeah, I bet. And do you have to manage that? Do you have to do something to make sure that... Because obviously cooking in a kitchen, it's hot. There's a lot going on. It is quite stressful. Do you have ways of kind of trying to keep it calm? Do you have people that you're like, I know if that guy's on the shift, everyone's chill because he's really fun? Or...
I think it's because we're now into... After 30 years, the team is brilliant. And so if you might be surprised, you stood in the kitchen in service, how quiet it is.
Really?
They put the radio on or music if they want in the morning, in the afternoon, but when service is on, it's just quiet, really quiet and calm. It hasn't always been like that, I'd say. It's taken years to get to that stage.
Well, it's been a cultural change, hasn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, there's a few chefs I've worked with in the past. I remember Richard Phillips, who used to do some TV stuff. I remember him talking, and actually Callum Franklin, talking about this change that has come in over the last 2 decades from, it was very different, wasn't it, in the 90s?
Oh, kitchens have got an awful lot calmer now. I think some of it's also because the equipments have evolved more. So, the level of human error goes down. But certainly they're much more relaxed. Fantastic.
So we should all learn this at home then when we're cooking. Don't have an argument with your other half if you're making dinner for everyone.
No, exactly.
Don't watch any... I often watch things. My relaxation, I love cooking, but I often put on some TV
in the background,
and I'm cooking, and I'm probably helping the kids with their homework. And actually, I'm actually quite relaxed now because I'm doing 3 different things, and it's making my brain busy.
Yeah.
Maybe don't watch any violent TV while you're cooking. Then
I find I've kind of fallen back in love with cooking. I fell out of love with it for a bit. I think it's because I felt I became a hamster on the wheel.
Yeah.
With all the things going on, and now it's cathartic, and I'm starting to question myself again. Question everything means also question myself. What can I smell? Why am I smelling this, etc.
I think there's I mean, I'm saying this from my own experience from ADHD, that it's really fun to learn something new. It's really fun to challenge things and change things and create new things. It's really not fun to rinse and repeat. And I've really noticed that in my career, I've got to keep changing. I've got to keep doing something new. Otherwise, and I run a business, and the element of actually running a business quite often is you just need to do the same thing really well. And it's no, I want to change it. I want to make it new. Otherwise, I'm going to get really bored.
There's a great quote from a guy called Heraclitus, Greek guy, obviously a couple of thousand years ago. And he said, no man puts his leg in the same river twice. For the river's never the same, and the man is never the same. So these 2 changing things. So even if you repeat the same thing, you're not the same person. So there's that variation in it as well. But it's funny, cooking in a restaurant is very, very, very different from cooking at home. Because a restaurant's more like, you call it a brigade, and it's more like an orchestra. So someone on the cello, someone's on the bass, someone's on drums, etc. They're the different sections of the kitchen. And it's down to the chef to conduct the different sections so that the food comes together at the same time. Whereas at home, it's just down to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's all on you.
Yeah.
And there's other distractions going on, isn't there? There's, in my house, there's kids, there's dogs, there's probably a neighbour coming in. There's just other stuff going on all the time, which means you don't get things out the oven exactly when you should have done, or whatever.
Definitely. Why is it that you're in your kitchen and you can smell burning, and you realise that it's what's in the oven, and then you run? but it's like, let's say it's 3 feet away. You run to get it. If it's burnt, it's burnt.
Yeah, it's done now. No, it's so true. Well, it's fantastic. It's been so brilliant to meet you and talk to you and share so many different stories. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And and 30 years of the Fat Duck, such an incredible milestone. Congratulations for that. And I hope our listeners will get down and come and try your new a la carte and taste some of these dishes from the last 20 years.
The resurrected dishes. Great dishes. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been fantastic to meet you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Food Rebels, which is available on radio stations around the UK and further afield. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Audible. Please remember to subscribe and rate us with 5 stars or follow us. It makes such a difference, not just to our podcast and radio show, but it really helps to support the guests that come on the show with us. We're also on Instagram at food_rebels. So give us a follow, do get in touch. We love hearing from you and let us know what you think. Thanks so much for joining us and make sure you taste the rebellion.